Welcome to Crosspoint. An interactive program featuring ministers and leaders of the Christian community addressing the issues that are challenging the church today. Here's your host, Mark Taylor.
Is there an evil being bought and paid for into America? Let's look at this. Welcome to Crosspoint, and I'm Mark Taylor. Daniel Davidson joins me today on my show. His book, Pagan America, talks about the decline of Christianity and a dark age that is trying to invade the land. And today here on Crosspoint, we're taking a look at something that's really affecting every person on the continent. But here in America, folks, we're seeing and that's what the book is about, a decline of Christianity and the dark age to come. The book's entitled Pagan America, and I'm talking to the author of that book, Daniel Davidson. And John, a good book here in the introduction part of the book. It's entitled A New Dark Age. It says the argument of this book is straightforward. America was founded not just on certain ideals, but on certain kind of people, predominantly Christian people, and it depends for its survival on their moral virtue, without which the entire experiment in self-government will unravel. He says, as Christianity fades in America, so too will our system of government, our civil society, and all of our rights and freedoms without the natural cultural shape by the Christian faith, without a majority consensus in the favor of traditional Christian morality. America as we know it will come to an end. Instead of free citizens in a republic, we will become slaves in a pagan empire. Well, that's a pretty tough statement, but it's a very true statement in what we're seeing unravel around us in our world today, is it not?
Yeah, I think it is. And the book came out in 2024 before Trump was reelected. And I think it's tempting for people to kind of breathe a sigh of relief when, like, their side wins, or when there's a Supreme Court decision that they like, or when their party wins a majority in Congress. And we too often kind of shift our perspective on society and our civilization onto the political kind of horse races of the day. But the argument I'm making in this book is broader than the churn of our democratic politics. This is really a drift away from Christianity that's been going on for more than a century in this country, and the implications of it stand whether Republicans are in charge or Democrats are in charge, or whether there's a conservative majority on the Supreme Court or a liberal majority. The trend is the same across the decades, and if we don't reverse it, then the situation that I described, that you just read from the introduction, is going to come to pass. And part of the purpose of the book is to describe and outline some of the ways that we are beginning to see this already come to pass.
Well, very true. And the book, by the way, folks, is a good hardback book, the one I've got anyway. And let's see, well over 300 and some pages in it. And right here on the front part of the cover of the book, you say here, evil is coming worse than we can imagine. The Christian cultural capital that Americans have long taken for granted has run out. We are rapidly and invariably losing the virtues, principles, and assumptions that have shaped our republic. So when you say the Christian culture capital that Americans have long taken for granted has run out, talk to us about that, what you're saying there.
Yeah, the idea there is that our sort of way of life here in America, our system of government, all of the rights and the freedoms that we enjoy here, they rely for their coherence, for their vitality, on a Christian substructure, on a Christian civilization, and a way of life of a Christian people. And if the people themselves do not espouse these Christian beliefs and live them out and live by Christian moral principles, and insist that Christian morality be the basis of civic morality, then the whole structure that's built upon that foundation begins to collapse. And when I say that we've been drawing down on the capital of Christian civilization and now the capital's run out, I mean that we've been drawing down on it without replenishing it, which is to say, as we become a less Christian people, we oftentimes think that we can retain the structures of Christendom without the actual religious belief and piety and devotion that are at the heart of Christendom. And to put it succinctly, you might say that you don't get the culture without the cult. In other words, America has to be an actual Christian country where most Americans are practicing Christians in order for us to retain things like freedom of speech, basic civil rights, consent of the governed, the rule of law. All of those things rely on a Christian worldview. They rely on a theological claim. We often think that the Bill of Rights and the Declaration are these abstract principles, but they're not. They're theological claims about what man is and who God is and what our relationship should be to God and what our relationship, in light of that, should be to one another and how we should organize life together. So when you say something like, all men are created equal, that's a Christian theological claim that is not repeated in any other religion in the world. The Muslims don't believe that. The Buddhists don't believe that. The Hindus don't believe that. The Christians believe that because we believe in the doctrine of Imago Dei. And so from that flows all these other implications for our American civilization. And if we become the kind of people that no longer accepts that theological claim, well, then there's no reason for us to believe that an individual should have rights, that we should have freedom of speech, that all of these things that we associate with American life and our American system of government, there's no basis for them anymore. And so as we draw down that capital and don't replenish it, there comes a point when that capital has run out. And so we begin to see the effects of that and the erosion of the ideas that have become central to the American experiment.
You have a part in here called The Slow Death of Paganism. I'm looking at page 43, and you tell kind of the history of pagan societies and how they've affected culture. And you say here right in the middle of this page that the Christian faith is the only thing that has ever stopped them, which is these type of movements, anywhere in the world among any people. Without Christianity, the West will become something else, quite different than that of what it has been for the past 16 centuries, and quite unrecognizable compared to what is even a few decades ago. I think we're starting to see that now in places like France, maybe Italy, and other places where they've allowed so much of this other cultures counter to what they are now taking over their complete government.
Yeah, that's right. And Europe has a particular problem with Islam that we don't yet have here in the United States. And the book is mainly concerned with America. I focus on the manifestations of sort of the post-Christian era that we're seeing here. In Europe, the challenge is different, but the principle is the same. They're shedding their Christian civilization, and into that vacuum, other civilizations, other religious worldviews are kind of swooping in and imposing their vision of morality and their vision of society. And, the obvious example is when you go to France or Italy or England even, there are parts of those countries where you go and it does not look like those countries. It looks like a Muslim country. You have mosques, you have the call to prayer, you have women in hijabs, you have segregation of the sexes, you have Sharia courts. And that is a result of the leadership of those countries basically rejecting their Christian heritage, rejecting the Western civilization that came from that Christian heritage, and embracing a kind of global multiculturalism that is really at bottom very naive. But we see the same thing happening in the United States, which is not to say that we see Islam on the same scale, although I think we will in time if we don't do anything about it. But we see a kind of pagan morality or a pagan ethos creeping into public life in this country. And the pagan morality and the pagan ethos is simply one of brute force, of domination. Might makes right. That's how the ancient Roman world was. That's how all pagan societies have been. And that's really what I'm concerned with in this book, is that the rise of that pagan ethos of the strong doing what they will and the weak suffering it.
Yeah. And I know that we've got to really a lot of times look back in history. I know here, a few years back, we had this wonderful thing of people tearing down statues of our history all over the country and trying to get rid of that. You talk in Chapter 2, it's entitled The City on a Hill. You talk about Winthrop, who was, by the way, John Winthrop was a pastor, and the Puritans. And you talk about liberty. And you're talking about saying liberty was not a license to do as they pleased, but freedom to choose the good, to worship God, and to practice her faith without compulsion of fear. Boy, there's been a lot of changes to that, of what people consider to be liberty these days.
Yeah, it's interesting. John Winthrop and the Puritans of Massachusetts Bay Colony, and really, all of those civic and religious leaders in the first 150 years of colonial life in America, they tended to talk about liberty not in terms of personal liberty, but the liberty of a people or of a place. Henry Adams, was much more inclined to talk about the liberty of America versus the liberty of Americans. That's not to say they didn't believe in certain civil rights and individual rights. Of course they did, but they understood that the whole people, the idea of these societies, these colonial projects, and then later the United States, the idea was that you would be free not to do whatever you wanted, but you would be free to do what is right according to your conscience. You would be free to pursue virtue and to live according to the dictates of your conscience. We misunderstand the phrase life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness had a specific meaning for the people who wrote those documents and who invoked that phrase. The pursuit of happiness was not this libertarian kind of laissez-faire, you do your thing, I'll do mine, live and let live. The pursuit of happiness for them was another way of saying the pursuit of virtue or the acquisition of virtue. That's what made someone happy. And what they were saying there is that we want a society where you are free, your life is secure, your liberty is secure, and you are free to do the things that you need to do to acquire virtue and attain true happiness. And we've come a long way from that understanding, but we've got to get back to it.
I know, too, there in that same chapter, you talk about how our founders, there on page 59, may have believed in a formal separation of church and state, but not in the total separation of politics and religion. And you talk about today, we've forgotten what those early generations of Americans understood well. As far as I can ever understand, yes, the state was to stay out of the religious, out of the church, but the church was to have a great influence upon our political system, right?
Absolutely. And it's really clear when you look at the history and you look at what these men actually did. I think I mentioned this in that chapter, that one of the first things that the first Congress did was, of course, they passed the Northwest Ordinance, and then they appropriated money to build schools and churches in the Northwest Territory because they knew that to integrate those lands and the future communities that would be built there into the nation as a whole, that there would need to be support for religion and education. They thought those two things were essential to forming Americans and to retaining, the American character of the republic that they had just created. And then another one of the first things they did was appropriate public funds for a Christian chaplain for Congress to pray over Congress, to give invocations. And this was before they passed the First Amendment. So there's no way that they thought appropriating funds for a Christian chaplain for the legislature was, the same thing as establishing religion, which the First Amendment prohibited. They had a very different understanding of what establishment of religion meant. And I think we take the line from Thomas Jefferson's letter that there should be a wall of separation between church and state totally out of context. It is, as you said, to protect the church from the state, not to insulate the state from the influence of the church or the churches in our case.
Well, I know that you have worked as a senior editor for the Federalist and have an over nearly a 25-year career in journalism. If people want to find out more about this book, find about other stuff that you've done as well, how would they go about doing that?
Most of what I write is published at thefederalist.com. From time to time, I write elsewhere, and on social media, I'm at John D. Davidson. And, of course, the book you can get on Amazon or wherever you get books. It's out there.
All right. Well, folks, stay with us, and we're going to have more right after this.
Do you have 5 minutes for God? I'm Pastor Ed Wilson, and I believe there's no better way to begin each morning than spending a little time with Him. That's why every weekday morning I bring you a short devotional broadcast designed just for that. Look up God's 5 Minutes wherever you get your podcasts to kickstart your spiritual walk for each day. We'll always do it in 5 minutes or less. Have you talked to God today?
This is Mark Taylor. If you miss a broadcast of Crosspoint, you can always go to our website at www.kneo.org and click on the Programs page. There you can access the current Crosspoint program as well as the last 4 programs that have been aired. Never miss another Crosspoint program again. Go to www.kneo.org today. And welcome back to Crosspoint. I'm Mark Taylor. Thanks for joining me today on my show as I'm talking today with John Davidson, and we're talking about a book that he has put out, Pagan America, The Decline of Christianity and the Dark Age to Come. And John, I'm looking here, and this is so true, on page 89 of the book. You say, America life is nearing its zenith. By 1958, that's about the time I was born, an estimated 52 out of 100 Americans were affiliated with the mainline denomination, Protestant denomination. Now, I believe that number today is like 18%.
Yeah.
A lot's changed, and our neglect of this right here is probably this type of decline has had a great effect on what's happened throughout the years.
It absolutely has. You know, one of the people I quote, I think, in that chapter is the writer Jody Bottoms, who wrote a book called The Age of Anxiety, which was all about the collapse of the mainline Protestant denominations beginning in the late 1960s and really picking up full steam in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And he says that that's one of the major, if not the major event, sociological event in the life of the American Republic, is the collapse of the mainline Protestant churches. Because so much about our form of government and our way of life in this country was sustained by the mainline churches and the Christian morality that they preached and expected of their congregations. And that as those churches collapsed, that the whole foundation for American life kind of got pulled out from under us, and we're, you know, as those churches have gone away, in many cases they haven't been replaced by anything, and so, you know, you can track the collapse of Christian membership in these churches and Christian piety, you know, at least in self-reported surveys of people saying how often they go to church, how often they pray, church membership, things like this. And the rise of the so-called nuns, the people who have no religious affiliation. And, you know, America has never, up until very recently, up until the last 2 or 3 decades, been a country with a significant portion of people who had no affiliation with any Christian church. It just has not been part of our history. And so this is we're kind of coming into a new era right now where if the majority of the country, which on the current trajectory, we will be a majority non-Christian country within our lifetimes. That will be a situation we've never had before in America. And part of my argument is that the America that we have been is not going to be possible with a people that are not Christian. And the founders completely understood it, and they said so over and over and over again.
You know, you have a part in here, page 111 of the book, you talk
the Christian,
the collapse. And
yes.
You talk about paganism manifest in many forms. You say a great number of them are examples and devotees of climate change activism, the oldest pagan superstition on the planet. You also, down at the bottom of the page, said anyone, though, that questions this climate cult is a heretic and denier who must be silenced, shamed, and discredited, even it's quite obvious that climate is always changing. So they have their own talking points and have apparently had them for years then, I guess, haven't they, that they're going to use to try to dumb America down, which now is eventually starting to take root.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think one of the misunderstandings we have is that, you know, as Christianity fades, atheism and kind of secular scientific materialism will come to, dominate the culture. But that's not what's happening. We're not going to be a secular, scientific materialist, coldly rational society as Christianity fades. Instead, we're going to be a kind of pagan or neo-pagan society, because people are inherently, by their nature, religious, and they seek spiritual meaning in life, and they see that life is both physical and spiritual. And so what we're seeing with things like the cult of climate changeism is a form of neo-pagan belief that is able to take root in our society because Christianity has retreated. And so it has all the markings of a kind of neo-pagan religion or a post-Christian religion, without, of course, the key thing that you need, which is forgiveness and redemption, and a real sort of foundational gospel message. It doesn't have those things. Because it is, as I said, a neo-pagan religion. So I think we're going to not see the rise of atheism as Christianity retreats. We're going to see a rise of different forms of spiritualism and neo-pagan belief, and the climate change cult is just one of those.
So I guess that's what you might be talking about in the portion of the book where the rise of materialist magician, and you talk about the rise of the kind of a freelance witchcraft. You talk about how teenagers are turning to these things and as a way to exert some measure of control over their lives at a time when they feel a great uncertainty into the world. So this is nothing more, again, than this ancient paganism that you've been telling us about, isn't it?
Yeah, it's sort of adapted for a modern context. One of the things I say early on in the book is that when I say that paganism is going to return or it is returning, it's not that there's going to be, ancient paganism or, the forms of ancient paganism suddenly cropping up in the middle of Times Square with temples to Zeus and Apollo. But the pagan impulse and the pagan ethos are going to express themselves in a modern context. And one of those ways, as you mentioned, is the rise of witchcraft, a kind of therapeutic freelance witchcraft that is very popular among young people, and you can track how popular it is on apps like Instagram and TikTok, where witches and warlocks and other self-styled pagan practitioners give each other advice. They will cast spells for a fee. You saw a huge explosion in astrology and tarot card reading during COVID that has not abided, and this has been pretty well documented and covered by secular mainstream journalists. These are the things that we should expect to happen as Christianity retreats from the culture.
Yeah. And then when they get a big voice behind them, I guess like Taylor Swift or something, that even makes that a little bit more tantalizing too, especially the younger crowd. And, there's a lot of stuff of that going on out there. You also mentioned in here, and again, the abortion. It's always been a part of a cult-like type of thing where, infants were sacrificed on the altars of Moloch and Baal. But you talk about the altar of individual will and power, which is the basis of paganism, is the idea that abortion is a positive good, is an endorsement, which you again talk about it being an ancient pagan practice of child sacrifice. But in the West, the Christian moral universe is giving way to the moral universe of people like the Aztecs and the Canaanites. It's easy for me and you to see, I guess I could say. Why is it so hard for others to see that?
I think this goes back to this kind of materialist magician mindset that we were just talking about. That there's this kind of cognitive dissonance for a lot of non-Christian modern people, where they say, well, I'm spiritual but not religious, and they think that they can sort of, on the one hand, be coldly rationalistic, and on the other hand, sort of believe and consult and seek out spiritual beings. Of course, a properly catechized person, any informed Christian, knows that seeking out spiritual beings is a very dangerous thing to do, because those spiritual beings are real, they're demonic, and if you seek them out, they will respond. So something like abortion, I think, is very insidious, because presents itself in the veneer of modern, rational, scientific materialism, that it's just a medical procedure, it's bodily autonomy, and it's a woman's choice. And people are able to kind of hide behind these phrases and these words without confronting the reality of what they're doing. And what they're doing is really a form of kind of self-worship and sacrificing of a child on the altar of their own desire and ambition. And increasingly, some people are beginning to talk about this in more frank terms, and I talk about one instance in the book of a woman who made a YouTube video, instructional video, about how to build an altar to your abortion. And it's very disturbing because she refuses to acknowledge the humanity of the child, and yet by talking in terms of altar and sacrifice and ritual, she's affirming that what has actually happened, which is that a child has been sacrificed. And so these are the kind of neo-pagan practices and beliefs that are melding with our modern kind of self-help and scientific jargon to create a strange post-Christian neo-pagan witch's brew out of which these terrible ideas and really horrific practices are coming. But, to your point, you can see it in the way that the justifications for abortion have changed since the early 1970s, from something that was considered kind of taboo to something that was safe, legal, and rare, as the Clintons put it, to now something that should be celebrated as a positive good.
You look in here and see all these things going on. We look around, you talk about these things in the book. Would you deny or say that basically, John, we're living on borrowed time in America? Would you think we are?
We're absolutely living on borrowed time, and that's what I meant in our first segment when we were talking about that the capital of Christian civilization has run out. We've drawn down that capital, and there's nothing left in the bank. We haven't replenished it. We are not a pious and religiously devoted enough country to have replenished that capital. And so, yes, we're living on borrowed time, borrowed money, whatever metaphor you want to use. We have to be reconverted as a country before we can recover our Republican way of life and civilization. And that is a very tall order indeed.
Yeah. And again, you have a place here in the book. You talk about what's really happened is they're promoting the transgender, the indoctrination in our public schools, and the gender transition of minors, even without parents' knowledge at times. Then you talked about our tax-funded abortions, of course, that go on. It says, imagine, too, that the regime works hand in hand with global corporations, major media outlets, and elite institutions of every kind to manage nearly every facet of national life. And you're talking about this on page 224 of the book. But what are you talking about when you say of the national life? I mean, this is a lot bigger than America then.
It is. There are certain features of it that are unique to America, I think, in the way that these things are playing out. But the trend of de-Christianization and of the retreat of Christianity from public life is a feature of every Western country. And you could write a similar book about every country in Europe. Every country that has for 1,000 years or more been a Christian country, that just now, within living memory, has entered a radical program of de-Christianization, is experiencing these things. And it is an effort, as I say, as you just quoted, not just of governments, but of major media corporations, major institutions, entertainment industries. It is a thoroughgoing effort that affects the national life of every Christian country or once Christian country. And the things that I talk about in the book here in America are happening in all of the countries of the Western world. The transgender problem, the euthanasia problem, the pedophilia problem, the abortion problem, all of these are features of Western countries.
And folks, stay with us. We're going to have more on this very interesting conversation we're having today about a pagan America and the decline of Christianity in the dark age to come. We'll be back with more right after this.
Hi, this is Luke Taylor with the Sky High Podcast Network. If you've been blessed by the program that you're listening to, I'd like to personally ask you to consider supporting our station. Our network is a collection of programs produced by KNEO Radio in Neosho, Missouri, a nonprofit station dedicated to educating Christians, reaching the lost, and making an eternal impact. This program is just one of many designed to encourage, equip, and inspire you in your walk with Christ. To help keep these programs going strong, visit kneo.org and click the donate button. And if you'd like to let us know in the memo line that you're a listener of this program, we would truly appreciate it. Thank you for being part of what we're doing here at the Sky High Podcast Network. If today's program spoke to you, please prayerfully consider supporting our mission. Together, we can make a difference for eternity.
Offering words to encourage, teaching to inspire, and truth that defines real life.
This is who we are, what we offer, and what you can expect.
91.7 The Word.
And welcome back to Crosspoint. I'm Mark Taylor. I'm glad you joined me today here. We've got a very interesting conversation going on with John Daniel Davidson about Pagan America, that book that he has put out. And if people want to know more about this book, John, how would they go about doing that?
You can find the book on Amazon or wherever you buy books. It's out there. You can order it from Regnery or on Thrift Books. Wherever you like to get books, you can get a hold of Pagan America.
Back to Pagan America, that's chapter 8 of the book. You talk about in there on page 259 or 258 about how that the state is still somewhat constrained in its exercise of brute force against Hollywood, but major corporations, universities, mainstream media, Hollywood above all, and you say big tech, willingly cooperating with the state to enforce pagan morality and the regime's preferred narrative in the history and culture of politics. We are fighting some really big enemies in this fight for against Pagan America, are we not?
That's right. You just have to look back at recent history to see some of the ways that these major institutions and industries are on board with a decidedly post-Christian agenda. And we saw this quite clearly in COVID. I talked earlier in our conversation about how, principles like freedom of speech or freedom of conscience that we really associate it with being right at the heart of the American ideal, the American experiment. Those things mean absolutely nothing to these major corporations and institutions. And they showed us that during COVID, and they showed us that even after COVID. It meant very little to them to trample on the religious freedom or the free speech rights of Americans during COVID with nothing more than the invocation of science. You have to follow us because of the science. To hell with your rights. This is the kind of power and domination that is alien to a Christian civilization, but native in a pagan worldview. This is why we should expect more of the kinds of things that we've seen in recent years with a challenge to what we traditionally understand as American rights and American civil rights that are based upon a specifically Christian view of man.
Now, you have hit a good one here on page 270, 6, 7. You're talking in others there in this chapter about AI and the pagan future. You talk about AI might soon become smarter than us, which that's working towards that. Even if demons aren't using AI to manifest themselves, the AI can still become neo-pagan idols and even utterly, idols that are going to be doing a lot of things. We are seeing now where you can command robots to do something, and they'll work with you just like they're a human being. This is kind of scary, and I'm glad that you mentioned that because this is an area where demonic activity can really get heavily involved, can it not?
Yes, it can, and I document some of that in the book. And with AI, it's changing so quickly. The technology is growing so fast that it doesn't take long for examples to be outdated or superseded by other examples. AI is quite a bit more powerful now than it was when I was writing this book, a year and a half ago. But I think the principle is the same. The way that we are interacting with AI is fundamentally pagan. We are looking to AI to be a kind of god or a deity that is more powerful than us, that can do things for us and give us godlike powers. You know, people like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and some of these other Silicon Valley tech moguls talk about AI in explicitly pagan terms. Elon Musk has said we are creating God. Well, they're creating God in a literal sense, that they will do what these machines tell them to do. They will give over our independence and our autonomy and our decision-making powers to these machines that they've created that they don't fully understand. And that's not much different than an ancient king giving over authority and power to a demonic being that has more power than him, so that he can secure his rule, right? So that he can be godlike in his rule. And I think that those parallels are important. We even see how some people, and I mentioned this person in the book, think that AI can give us immortality, can extend human life. And there's a case of one Silicon Valley tech mogul who has given over his whole life to these AI algorithms, and he does whatever they say in hopes that he will be able to live forever. It sounds crazy, but it's actually, this is a real guy who's really doing this, and he really has considerable resources. And so we should expect these things to happen, is my point. It's sort of a feature of the decline of Christianity, is the rise of this version of paganism.
And kind of back to this part in the center of your book here, you do talk about, transgenderism, and it's really a dark side to America's existence, because the book is talking about a darkness, and dark age. And this stuff is really, again, this is demonic as well. This is not we're really destroying human body parts and trying to replace human body parts and make people into something that God didn't intend them to be. Yeah. This is a kind of a grossness in our society.
Yeah, it is, and it's not at all enjoyable to write about, I can assure you. The chapter on transgenderism is about transgenderism, but it's also about pedophilia. And the argument there is not that all transgender people are pedophiles, not at all. But the argument is that the same terrible logic that would justify something like transgenderism is also being used right now to justify pedophilia, which is, of course, the lie traces all the way back to the Garden of Eden, the lie of the serpent, that you shall be as gods, you will not surely die. The ideology at the heart of transgenderism is a kind of demonic ideology of self-creation, that you can be anything that you want, and that there's a true self inside of you over and against the physical reality of your created body and the created world, and that you have the right and indeed the duty to manifest that self-creation, and it's part of your identity. It's the core of your identity, and no one can deny that, and you can go to any grotesque lengths to fulfill that. And this is the same rationale and the same logic that is currently being deployed by, if you can believe it, pro-pedophile activists who call themselves MAPs, minor attracted persons, is the euphemism they use. But the logic and the reasoning is the same. If you can't say to a 14-year-old that they cannot consent to have puberty blockers or to have these mutilating surgeries, then how are you going to say to a minor attracted person that they cannot have a relationship with a 14-year-old if the 14-year-old consents? It's the same logic, and it is playing out in very disturbing ways, and we ignore it, I think, at our peril.
Yeah, no doubt. Now, we have talked about the heritage of America, which it was built on, and how it's been actually taken for granted. And we know that we've had long time held certainties and beliefs, of things that are true that we can rely on, but we see them crumbling before us. can we expect things to get better, or basically things to grow worse? Are we actually headed, like the Bible has told us, for the end result of the end days, the end times?
Well, I think that it took many generations for us to get to this point. And so I think it's not something that is going to be turned around in, a few years. It's probably not something that will be turned around in our lifetimes. The process of de-Christianization of the West, as I describe it in the book, began more than a century ago. And so as we begin to fight back and as we begin to take stock of where we are, I think it's reasonable to expect that this is a fight that is not something that will be accomplished in the lifetime of anyone who is alive today. We're fighting now for a world for our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren, that they might be able to live in the kind of country that we used to be and that we used to have. That can seem depressing on the one hand, but on the other hand, there can be a great relief, I find, in just being honest about where we are and about what has happened. One of the things that I argue in the book is that this de-Christianization of America was something that was well underway and in some ways was already accomplished before any of us who are alive today were born. We inherited a post-Christian West, and we are fortunate enough to have been born in time to be able to still see what was lost and to fight to recover it. But it will be a long fight indeed, and we need to be realistic about that.
Okay, so then, John, we've been talking about the paganism and stuff. Well, isn't paganism really something that's based more on just a flat-out hatred of Christianity, and it will do anything it can to destroy Christianity?
Sure. At bottom, paganism is really a kind of Satanism. It's a rejection of God. It's a rejection of Almighty God as the creator of the world, and it's a rejection of Jesus Christ and his gospel. And so that is a war that has been going on, of course, since the beginning of time. And in our time, the difference now today is that, our civilization here in the West has been Christian for 1,600 years. And now we're entering a period in which we are losing the Christianity, the religion, and the sort of religious worldview that has been at the heart of Western civilization for all these long centuries. And that's a new thing. So, what is this world that we're coming into? And that's really what I'm grappling with in this book. What is the world that we're coming into? And how do we fight back against it? And how do we survive the storm that's breaking all around us? And that's something that I think every Christian needs to start thinking about very seriously.
As we prepare for the future, we're going to have, these relationships we have with different people. It's going to be tried. Morality is really going to be pushed. If you're a Christian, you're going to have to defend it, and you're going to be called all kinds of names for doing it. And what has happened to get us to this point is many people have forfeited that place. But we're headed to a place, would you not say, where the violence would be something that's common to have, an estate actually just runs everything. I mean, we are hearing more and more people talking about socialism. They're electing people like in New York and Seattle and other places that completely have no regards whatsoever for our republic, yet use the words and the lies the whole time that they're trying to defend our Constitution, which they are not. We are in danger by allowing these people to get into power.
Yeah, that's right. And I do think, at the heart of the pagan worldview is violence, is domination, and the use of force by the strong against the weak. And I think that you're absolutely right to note that, in certain parts of this country, politicians and political leaders are taking power and being elected into office who have no regard for the Constitution and the Christian worldview that underpins it. We just saw last week the new mayor of New York, Zohran Mamdani, a foreign-born Muslim, say that he is going to reject rugged individualism for the warm embrace of collectivism. Collectivism, of course, is an implicit invocation of violence. And, the people who have been the most famous collectivists in the world, the Soviet communist revolutionaries, enacted the most violent revolution in world history. They killed tens of millions of people, and they rejected Christianity explicitly in pursuing this utopian vision. And so I think that is also something we need to be realistic about, that, what lies on the other side of a Christian society is not this, rational, peaceful, well-ordered, technocratic society, but it's barbarism, it's violence. And we've seen that in the last century. We've seen what that produces, and it produces mass violence and slaughter. And I think that we are naive to think that it can't happen in this country. Of course it can. It can happen in any country that totally rejects Christianity and the claims that are at the heart of Christianity about man and God.
Thank goodness we have God, because there is hope. As you say in your word here, in hard times even, we can find hope with God. Now, before I let you go here, I want you to again tell people how they can find a copy of this book, but also tell us, since you're a senior editor at the Federalist, tell us a little bit about what the Federalist does.
Yeah, the Federalist, for those who are not familiar with it, is an online journal of politics, culture, and religion. We've been around for a little over 10 years, launched in 2013, 2014. I'm a senior editor there, and we do a lot of coverage of American politics, but we also cover things like what we're talking about, big cultural shifts and religious movements in the West. And, we publish daily on topics big and small, close to the news cycle, and also sometimes about sports and popular culture. And that's at thefederalist.com. That's where most of my writing is.
Thank you so much for being with us today here on Crosspoint. Appreciate you coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, that was a good interview today with Don. I appreciated him coming on the show and talking with us. Pagan America, folks, it is happening. Now, this book that I have in my other hand, the Holy Bible, it's super strong, and it can outdo anything that the devil throws at us. Thank goodness for people like John Davidson that tell us about things that are going on and research them and get us information. But thank God for the Bible that we can stand on, because it's the book that helps us find the road to encouragement. It's the inspired words of God. They're not outdated. The Bible contains the most important words you're ever going to read and certainly ever follow. Be sure and join us again next time as we again discuss issues that are affecting the church. Have a great week. Allow God to use you for His purposes so that greater things can be done. Make your life count in God's plans for eternity. I'm Mark Taylor.
Crosspoint is a program produced in Studio 101 at KNEO Radio. Not all of the views on Crosspoint reflect those of the management or staff of KNEO. You may contact the Crosspoint program at 10827 Highway 86 East, Neosho, Missouri 64850, or by email crosspoint@kneo.org. You can hear Crosspoint 4 times a week: Saturday morning at 1, Saturday afternoon at 2, Saturday evening at 9, and Sunday evening at 7. You can also listen anytime online at kneo.org.
God's Word speaks truth. God's Word speaks life. And God's Word speaks to us today. Hi, I'm Pastor John Mehrens of the Granby Christian Church. Each week we explore God's Word together on In the Shadow of Your Wings, a radio broadcast on KNEO. Tune in each Saturday at 6:45 p.m. to hear the show. And if you ever miss it, you can always view the archive online at kneo.org. We also have the program available as a podcast as well, so you can listen anytime, anywhere. It's available from Sky High Podcast Network. I invite you to check out the show and learn more about our incredible God and how He cares for you. You can trust Him, you can depend on Him, and you can rest in the shadow of His wings.